Satellite Beach has been on the forefront addressing environmental issues such as sea level rise. The city now has to contend with cancer-causing chemicals that were once used in firefighting foam at Patrick Air Force Base and now have been found in its groundwater. Welcome to I Am Brevard. I'm Isadora Rangel. This week, I'm talking to Satellite Beach City Manager Courtney Barker about what the city is doing to address a suspected cancer cluster caused by those chemicals and why the city has decided to deal with sea level rise before it gets worse. Here it is. Courtney, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So let's begin with these cancer-causing chemicals that have been found in water around Satellite Beach. So far, it's only been found in groundwater, right? But explain a little bit just how you came aware of the issue and what has the city done so far to address it, given that there's no concern about possibly a cancer cluster in Satellite. So what has the city done so far regarding this issue?
So far, let's see, back, I think it was in early June, maybe late May, I received actually a resident tagged me in a Facebook post about the March 2018 Department of Defense report that came out that was talking about perfluorinated chemicals or compounds that were on bases across the nation, and particularly on Patrick Air Force Base. And she asked, have you tested the city's groundwater? And I read the report and we became pretty concerned. So we started calling labs to do some testing of the groundwater. And it took us probably about 2 or 3 weeks to figure out how to do that. And we decided to drill new wells. And the reason why was because that chemical is in a lot of the things we construct the wells with. So we wanted to make sure that that type of contamination wasn't present. So we drilled our own wells. We tested for the compounds. At that point, we knew that we were going to find them, and we did. Luckily, that it's very unfortunate that they're under there, and we're still pretty upset about it. But it is under the drinking water standard of EPA's health advisory, which is 70 parts per trillion, and the highest that we found was 45 parts per trillion in the groundwater. Our residents don't drink our groundwater in Satellite Beach. We drink City of Melbourne's water, which is sourced in wells across the bridge as well as Lake Washington.
And do we know exactly how those chemicals got in the water? Like you mentioned, they're found in several products and also in the firefighting foam that was used at Patrick. Any idea of the link between how those chemicals actually got in the water?
Well, obviously there's a lot of areas on Patrick Air Force Base that has those chemicals and that tested quite high for those chemicals. So clearly Patrick Air Force Base is a source for that. But also, I think it's important for residents and citizens across Brevard County to know that those chemicals are in a lot of household products, and even though they've been phased out over time in the United States in terms of manufacturing, they're still manufactured across in other areas overseas, and they're brought in household goods today. So you can still wear clothing that's waterproof clothing that still has it. You could put sunscreen on your skin that still has that in it. You can still use Teflon pans that still have those chemicals in it. So it's important to know that, and because of that, it's in the groundwater probably everywhere. So we're doing another pretty big comprehensive testing round with the county to determine exactly what that extent is.
And I believe the state is also getting involved in terms of trying to identify these possible clusters. Do you see us ever figuring out whether people who have cancer, had early onset cancer, different types of cancer, are we going to be able to figure out whether it was caused by these chemicals? I mean, where does that stand today? Do you have any idea? We
really don't. These compounds, the perfluorinated compounds, are still newly studied, if I guess you could call that. So on the state national level, there's not a lot of information yet about them, and honestly, the standards for the drinking water and groundwater standards across the nation that are being developed change quite a bit over time, and they seem to be getting more stringent over time. So as we know more about them, we'll be able to guide people better, but right now we just don't know. And so it's really difficult to determine a cancer cluster in the first place. it's even harder to figure out how, those residents and pinpoint one particular thing that are getting the cancer. So I don't know if we'll ever be able to answer that question.
And the city has asked the state to set standards, right? And also the federal government for funding to clean up those chemicals, I believe. Can you explain where are you in the process of possibly getting help from the state and the federal government?
Well, we've gotten a lot of support from our local delegation, and we've created a resolution requesting the state to set standards for groundwater and drinking water standards for those compounds. A lot of states have their own standards. Our state does not. So I think the fallback right now has been the EPA health advisory. But a health advisory is not a regulatory standard. So that's what we're requesting the state to create. And I don't know where the state is on that. We have a meeting with them in a couple weeks, and we'll see then.
And in the meantime, we have all these people who want answers, right? I mean, and understandably so, they've had cancer. For you dealing with this human side of the issue, how has it been for you? And, what is the city trying to do to manage, all these requests and complaints and, people getting very passionate and emotional about this issue?
Well, we've got a lot of people on both sides of the issue. So we have a lot of residents who are obviously very fearful. They want to make sure that their children are safe, that they're safe, and they're working with us to make sure that happens. So they're bringing in their request of what they want us to test. So we're trying to satisfy those requests, and we have written those into our scoping plan for groundwater testing. And we have some residents that are concerned about is our chlorates in our drinking water okay, things like that. So we've set up meetings with the water utility so they could talk through those issues with the water utility. But probably the biggest hurdle right now is the misinformation that's on social media that's constantly taking our time. And so we're trying to address that as well, which has been hard for us.
So you spend a lot of time on Facebook just answering questions and trying to clarify things?
Well, there's been a Facebook page that was set up for residents by a non-resident, and that we've been locked out of that Facebook page. So we're getting ready to write a Beachcaster to inform our community about what we've been doing and make sure that we get the information that way.
And you mentioned that you have received several requests for testing. How many of those requests, and are you going to be able to fulfill all of those?
Yeah, once you get, it's really the sampling that's the cost, and once you get the sample done, getting it tested for more than one thing it's not that big of a cost difference. So we're trying to make sure we get all of what they want in there, and we've gotten some good feedback from some community residents about what could have been a former military dumping site back in the 50s and 60s. So we are following through with those investigations, with the county. So all of that it's not that hard to extend those the testing to satisfy those concerns. But we've had probably maybe 6 residents who've asked us to do tests for certain compounds and certain chemicals.
Wow, that's very interesting. We have very informed residents.
Mm-hmm.
And now Erin Brockovich has a scheduled visit here. And she already sent one of her associates, and some residents were complaining that the city had a closed door meeting with that associate. Can you address that concern? They believe that the city might have violated open meeting laws. Can you address that and explain the reason for that meeting?
Yeah. So the associate was Mr. Bob Bocock. He's apparently, he donates his time as a consultant to address some of the concerns that are sent in to Ms. Brockovich, and he requested a meeting with the city and whoever we thought would be appropriate. So we invited representatives from Patrick Air Force Base, state representatives, and then we invited the press as well, particularly Florida Today and the Melbourne Beach Sider, just to make sure that the transparency was there. What we did not want was there's a certain group that has been very vocal on social media and taking videos of staff members and things like that, and editing them to the point of changing the context, and we did not want that to happen at this meeting. So we wanted the meeting to be productive and professional. So what we did was we closed the meeting to the public, allowed the press in, had a professional meeting, and we had one council member in there at a time, and the council members just didn't really participate to make sure that we complied with Sunshine Law.
And Ms. Brockovich, she's scheduled to be here on Saturday, I believe. Obviously, this is a case that's getting national attention. Does it help to have someone with, someone like Erin Brockovich visit the area? And what are you trying to get out of her visit? And is there anything that she can do to help us?
Well, we were trying to highlight it would be great if the Department of Defense had the adequate funding to clean up their sites. They do a great job at Patrick Air Force Base, I think, in meeting with them on the money, with the money that they get. But obviously we all need more, and we also think there needs to be more funding into researching these compounds and how they impact our water bodies, our adjacent water bodies. We're very concerned with how they're affecting the lagoon and the wildlife. So that's another issue that we're requesting assistance with. And we are hoping that we have a resident who's very concerned with certain aspects of the disinfectants we use in our drinking water, and so we had her there to talk about that with Mr. Bocock, and he had some ideas on how to fix that. So we're hoping that maybe he could do that. We haven't heard anything back though.
And so it seems, obviously, we don't know the exact source of these chemicals, but there's a strong possibility that they came from Patrick Air Force Base. Do you get a sense that as a city you're kind of stuck holding the bucket when obviously this wasn't caused by the city, it was caused by the federal government, and now you're basically being left to deal with the issue?
Yes and no. I mean, I think most of our residents know that there's not a lot we can do about it. I think sometimes there's people who take an issue and make it more than it is for political purposes, and that sometimes happens. But I think most of our residents understand that we can't do much about it. We are looking into one site that tested higher to see if it had to do with an old dry cleaner, and it was funny because I was actually hoping it did, because that is something that we could we could address ourselves, because that is something that we could designate a brownfield and clean it up, but unless we find proof of that, we can't. So.
And what have you figured out whether it was a dry cleaner or not?
It was, but we're testing around that specific property in this next round of testing to see if we can make that determination.
So it seems like these chemicals can be found in pretty much everything. And then how do you identify the culprit? It seems like this might be an issue where you don't really have someone to blame, which makes it a lot harder to solve it, right?
It is, and that's a big issue with large-scale, especially groundwater contamination, because you really, particularly with a compound like this, to pinpoint blame is hard. And it's easier when you have a gas tank leak or something like that, but this is different, and that's where, unfortunately, the taxpayers get to foot that bill.
And so still speaking about water, but moving on a little bit, Satellite Beach is obviously known for being very forward with environmental issues, and one of the things the city has done is address sea level rise. Can you explain why the city has been so proactive? I mean, we're not the only city on the coast, but Satellite Beach is definitely one of the cities, along with Miami Beach and others, who are taking a proactive step in addressing it. How did that start for the city? Like, okay, we need to pay attention to this issue.
We are just very lucky in the community of Satellite Beach to have incredibly smart, talented residents, because we had two residents, Dr. Ken Lindeman and Dr. John Fergus, who served on our planning advisory Comprehensive Planning Advisory Board in 2009, and they started the first study that we did. So if it wasn't for them, we probably wouldn't be as far along as we are now. And it's a good thing too, because we have now found through GIS mapping with Stetson University and a Florida Sea grant that we have utilities that are sitting in water. I mean, they're just sitting, the water table's so high, especially in the high tide, that they're being infiltrated constantly by water. So it's stuff like that we've taken a lot of forward-thinking steps, particularly in coastal erosion and flooding.
And what were some of the key findings of that study?
The key findings have been that we need to look at, we're going to have new flood zones. We already have new flood zones. It'll change pretty rapidly over time, and we need to start looking at better building patterns, possibly, stilting buildings in certain locations, looking at trying to discourage development in the flood zones and encourage the redevelopment in areas that are a little higher and drier, stuff like that.
So I imagine you had to make changes to your comprehensive plan to address that.
Yep, we've already have. So we've done a lot of changes to our comprehensive plan. We started with coastal erosion. We're in the process of increasing the construction setback from the ocean, which has garnered some attention.
Yeah.
So whenever you do code changes like that, it affects people personally. So that's a hard thing to do.
And you mentioned that, what is the time frame? You mentioned that we're going to have more flood zones in the future. How many years from now are we talking about?
We are looking at, we have planning horizons of 20, 40, and so on years from now. And right now, to give you an example, we have a fire station that's on South Patrick Drive. During the hurricanes, the roads were flooded in front of the station, and we have a public works department that's kind of right across the street, and the public works department was flooded. And we started looking at the future flood zones of that area and realized that we don't want to reconstruct buildings there. We're getting ready to do a lot of improvements. And spend money that we want to last for 100 years in an area that we may have to move in 20. So we actually purchased property in another area, and we're going to be building new buildings in that area.
Wow, that's alarming to hear that you're actually changing how you construct your buildings because of this issue. Is Satellite Beach more vulnerable than other communities, or is just that Satellite Beach is just really paying attention to the issue when other communities might not be? Is that what you think it is, or?
Well, we all have different issues. So you may have Satellite Beach. I would say from Patrick Air Force Base to Melbourne Beach, we have a very highly eroded area. So it's designated by DEP. So coastal erosion is a big deal for this area. You may not have that issue over on the West Coast, but every coastal community this is a big issue for Florida. Every coastal community. I think in that case, if you see communities not looking at it, it's just that it's hard because they're not concerned about it because it's not right in their face, or that they're just afraid of the answer.
And obviously we still have a lot of lawmakers who don't believe climate change is caused by human activity. And how do you approach this topic? Because obviously sea level rise and climate change, they go hand in hand, but how do you approach this topic with lawmakers, and because obviously you want them on your team, but how do you approach that with them when they might not even believe that climate change is even happening, or that it might be caused by human activity?
So I think, it's hard for us as the city of Satellite Beach because we have been very vocal in that arena. So when we had our public meetings, a lot of people cautioned us not to use the words climate change and stuff like that, and we refused to do that. It is climate change; it's happening, but we do understand that people are fearful of looking at it, and that I think that comes out of fear, is not wanting to face that. It's a huge issue. It affects so many things. And so for people to be fearful of looking into that, it's totally understandable. So we try to temper our comments a little bit, but I have to say that we're pretty truthful in saying, look, it is climate change, and unless we change something like changing our energy use, stuff like that, we're going to be dealing with a lot bigger issues.
And what's the response you usually get to that?
I think the tide is changing, I have to say. People that, especially elected officials that used to look at me like I was crazy 5 years ago, are now starting to pay attention.
Oh, really? So, that's good news, especially now with hurricanes. I mean, you have information even coming from the federal government that hurricanes, potentially can become worse because of climate change, and it's just, I'm glad to hear that people are paying attention to climate change potentially being a cause for that, right? And especially for Satellite Beach, that's a big issue. So why is Satellite? You mentioned you have very smart residents, but why is Satellite Beach so always on the forefront of these environmental issues? I mean, what makes it so special?
I don't know. It's always been that way. It was like that well before I got there. They have always looked at acquiring beachfront property. I mean, the city owns 40% of our beachfront. We have 16 beach accesses where you see other cities near us have maybe 3 or 4. So they've always been that way. And we have Sampson's Island. Some communities chose to build on islands like that. We chose to preserve it. So it's just a culture, I think, that it's always been there.
And one of the latest things you've done is the City Council passed a resolution encouraging businesses to stop using plastic straws. Again, it's not a ban, and businesses can opt in and out. And you mentioned India Atlantic did it before, but you guys ended up getting the credit because you have this reputation. But explain the issue with plastic straws. And in the last few months, we've heard so much more about it than ever before. But why are plastic straws such a big issue?
Well, I think plastic straws in themselves it's almost like a symbol of what we use that never goes away. I mean, every piece of plastic that's ever been made is still here today, and it's completely unnecessary. We do not need them, and I think that we pick on them because of that reason. It's a good symbol, and if you look at the trash on the beaches and you're part of the community that picks it up, you'll hear from them that the cups, the lids, and the straws, and along with the cigarette butts and stuff like that, are one of the most popular things they pick up. So I think it's a way for us to call attention to the disposable things we use all the time that we don't really need, and it's where we're focusing.
And what has been the response from businesses? Are they on board with the city?
Almost every restaurant. In fact, I have yet to find one that has not got on board with that in the city of Satellite Beach. We had some ones that right off the bat came on board, Papagallos, Sun on the Beach, Long Doggers, some of the ones that we all know and love. And then I went through Taco Bell and went through the drive-thru, and she asked me if I wanted a straw. So I think that's a good indication that people are catching on. And
could the city in the near future, let's say, completely ban plastic straws? Is that something that the city is considering?
The city's not considering that right now. I mean, a city could do that, but it looks like the community and the culture is starting to change, and I'm hoping that we don't have to do that, because we don't like to tell people what to do. We just want to encourage them.
And could a city take one step forward? For example, we still have plastic bags, and we have those styrofoam boxes that, like for carryouts, and those I know are really bad for the environment. I mean, could the city maybe expand? Like you see other cities outside of even Florida doing that with plastic bags and other types of pollutants.
Well, unfortunately, on the state level, they preempted us from banning plastic bags and styrofoam. But we did do, our city passed a resolution and an ordinance that requires anybody that does business with us. So if we do like an event or anything like that, the business has to, they're not allowed to use styrofoam containers. And so that's something that we could do, and we started using that, practicing that amongst ourselves. But until the state changes, they're thinking we really can't do much about that.
And I actually covered this issue in Tallahassee with plastic bags, and it's just, I know a lot of cities have signed petitions asking the state, is Satellite Beach involved, and try to have the legislature change its mind, and it's mind-boggling that they won't. But obviously they're under a lot of pressure from retailers and all of that, but has the city lobbied Tallahassee for that?
Yeah, we passed a resolution along with Surfrider some years ago, and we complain about it every time we go to Tallahassee. We don't like being preempted on anything, honestly. I mean, we believe that the government closest to the people works best for the people. Which basically means that if somebody comes in, it's easier to complain to me than somebody on the state level. But the plastic bag, or I guess you would call it the shopping association, retailers association, are very dead set against it, and they want to have a uniform regulation across the state, which makes it easier for them, but it makes it harder for local governments to do what their residents want. And in the coastal communities, we're the ones that see the sea turtles wash up, and we're the ones that see the plastic bags in the ocean. So it's, you'll see a bigger interest on the coastal side, or among coastal communities, to see the plastic bags go away.
And right before we started shooting, we were talking about recycling and how important it is that we educate people on what they should put in their recyclable bins. But we have roughly less than 2 minutes left. But explain a little bit, what are the lessons that people should learn about recycling? I think it's so important to get that message across.
Recycling is a tough business, and it's a business. So if they don't have a market for it, it's not going to get recycled. So that's what one of the things that Waste Management was trying to get across was, yes, everything is recyclable. I mean, everything is really. It's just whether or not somebody wants to buy it. And if there's no market for it, it goes in the trash. So right now, if you put a plastic bag in your recycle bin, it will mess up the machines at the plant. And when I was there touring, it shut down 4 times while I was there because of plastic bags. Hoses are not recyclable. Things like that, they just don't recycle. What they like is the thick plastics, like a 2-liter bottle. There's a big market for that right now. So those types of plastics, rinse them out, dry them, put them in your recycle bin. Recycle well, not everything, and try to reduce how much you use.
And we have only a few seconds left, but you're a lifelong resident of Brevard County. How have we progressed on environmental issues and trying to be more, better stewards of the environment? What is your assessment of what has happened in the last few decades here?
I think in the county itself has been somewhat, a pretty big leader in environmental issues, and we've had some of the most stringent wetland protection codes and things like that. We've always been like that. But recently with the lagoon, we've become a leader, and I think the community should be very proud of themselves in passing that lagoon tax.
Courtney, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
That's it for our show today. You can rewatch all Eye on Brevard episodes at Florida Today's YouTube channel, and I'll see you again next week.